Okay, so this week I had an unexpected trip. Actually, I had this trip planned, but then unexpectedly I needed to leave a day before. So I am not gonna have the weekly live call, but I'm gonna be sending this pre-recorded video to cover the topic of this week, which is attachment as a sign, attachment as a signal, right? So last week we talked about, so this month we're talking about embodiment of becoming. So embodiment of becoming is to really embody the version of you, and to be able to, rise above your habitual default past present self, rise above the reactionary pattern of reacting to the outside world. I think last week I talked about, there's mainly three ways that we can live, from this perspective, right? And I'm sort of tying into the full agreement, the first and the second and the third agreement, right? Now, that being impeccable with the words is about cultivating and nurturing your words, right? Your words means that actually, because when you think thoughts, and then when you have an image in your mind, those are, words that's associated, conception, and then you have a picture, right? So it's not a linear thing, right? So you have words on the thinking process, and you have a feeling in your body, and you sort of believe about certain things, and then you have the feeling based on the belief. This is important. You always have a feeling about something based on your belief that you're holding on to. And, after all, the most important belief that we can cultivate and nurture and nourish is the belief about yourself. How you see yourself and feel yourself and believe yourself in the world. And then I think my observation experience is that is the foundation that causes all of us to see the world and the life in a certain way. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the chapter 10 in this book, but the next chapter is spiritual eyes, right? Depending on, do you see yourself as a spiritual being? And thinking and having the concept of the spiritual being and seeing and feeling and being the spiritual essence of who you are is different. So I found that when we embody the essence of who we are, the spiritual essence, the more we practice that, the more we start really identifying and realizing that the mind and the body are something that we have. Many people live the other way around. Many people live as if they are the mind and then they are the body. So we have the body, we have the mind, and we don't have a soul. We are one. So if I have one message that I want all of us to embody is, how can we embody this idea that we are souls? Souls are not the same as we have soul. We have a soul, yeah? So the moment we start thinking and misunderstanding that we have the soul, automatically we start identifying ourselves as a mind. That's my experience observing people. And then when people start, identifying themselves as a mind, inevitably and automatically, those people are identifying themselves as their body as well. So the moment we realize the soul is not something that we have, but something that we are, we can begin shifting the awareness that, oh, the thoughts, the dimension of the mind, the thoughts and the feelings and belief, those are something that we have, right? Beliefs are not something that we are. Beliefs are something that we have. So why do we, why are we controlled? If there's somebody who is controlled, why are people controlled by what they have, not what they are? Does that make sense? So people are controlled by their belief. People are controlled by their thoughts. People are controlled by their feeling and emotions because they misunderstand that that is them. But the moment you start deepening the awareness that I'm going to repeat multiple times, so I can kind of, explain from a little bit different angles. So, hoping that one of them will, sink in and resonate with you more. The moment we realize that we don't have the soul, but we are one, we start realizing that the mind is something that we have, not something that we are. And that shift happens automatically, soul is who we are, not what we have. Then the mind is what we have, and the body is what we have. That is truly the key. So how can we embody this, right? How can we stop saying sentence or thinking thoughts or creating a reaction that indicates that false awareness and understanding? Many people use sentence as if they are the mind, they are the body, but the mind is what we have, body is what we have. Yeah. So I'm emphasizing this using the first, few minutes to repeat over and over and over, because, okay, it's one thing to kind of understand this idea. And then when we begin observing how we're using the language, how we're behaving, indicates assumption, right? Assumption is something that we talked about last week. So we want to be closely paying attention to how we're using the language. And then when we notice that, oh, what I just said almost indicates that I'm identifying myself as the mind, I'm identifying myself as the body, then you start observing, therefore you can change it, right? So this requires a little bit of time, a little bit of process, because many people have been identifying themselves with their mind. And the indication of that is the moment, this destructive emotion or negative thoughts arise inside of us. And then when we are being controlled by it, it means that that moment, we are being controlled by the mind, and then we start assuming that we are the mind, right? And the more we practice observing, I often say, if you're observing, you're not absorbed by it, you start creating distance from you and your mind, your thoughts and feelings and belief. And it becomes much, much like, this is the way that I like to explain based on my experience. The voice in your head and the emotions that sometimes people feel frustrated or resistance that they feel in the body start becoming smaller and lighter. It's almost like it moves away from you and creating distance a little bit. So it becomes a minimum distraction to stay at ease. The more you practice observing it, observation is a very important practice, because being the observant, you are embodying the soul. Being the observant with no judgment, with the sense of respect that this chapter is gonna address a little bit, with love, is who we are. And the moment we are observing our inner chatter and sensation with a sense of curiosity and respect and love, we are embodying the soul. Yeah. And the more we do that, the less the mind start taking over. Okay, that was a little bit of introduction, everybody. So this week, we are talking about attachment as a sign. So something that I have found that is very important is, it's sort of like a little bit of tricky, right? Because we are a relational being in this physical world, because we live in the realm of the relative. You cannot identify yourself without the contextual field, that's Neil's language, without the existence of others, right? So inevitably, you feel in the dimension of the mind, at the dimension of the mind, you feel like you're somebody conceptually because other people exist. That's why, this famous saying, I think what I think, you think I am, right? Many people live as, I think what I think, you think I am, right? So your mind, what you're imagining, what others are thinking of you becomes a part of your identity. Because when you are, being ignored, or not being acknowledged, or being even abandoned, that creates a death of ego because there's nothing that you can relate to. So attachment is a contrast and part of the divine blueprint that we must learn and overcome to transcend that egoic state, right? So relationality and being attached to is different. The more we cultivate the spiritual eyes, the more we cultivate relationality versus attachment. Attachment always has, there's no attachment that doesn't have a feeling of fear contained. That's what attachment is. When you're attached to something, you're magnetized and attached to, and you don't want to detach yourself from it, because when you detach yourself from that thing that you're attached to, you feel like you're going to lose the sense of self, right? Whatever that version that, in your life that you might have some sort of attachment. Everybody has some sort of attachment, right? Now, a lot of people are attached to their mother, right? Because we were actually a part of the mother. So it's inevitable, right? But then when we understand that we kind of go through this separation to create whole through awareness, at the beginning, when we are in our mother's womb, physically and kinesthetically, we were one, right? We are connected. Then you separate in this physical world. Now that we have this individual separation through the mind and the body, you can, you can hug as much as you want, to touch, to connect, right? That's good. But then you cannot be hugging, hugging with somebody and then live their entire life 24/7, right? Nobody is going to want that. So then the inevitable gateway is to create a connection and oneness through awareness. You can hug and you can shake your hand and you can do whatever we want to do. But then when there's a lack thereof, we don't want to feel like, it's separated, right? So through awareness, we create that wholeness once we become individual. So attachment, the message here is attachment always has some sort of fear connotation. And the reason that this week I'm, titling attachment as a sign is whenever we recognize some sort of attachment, we want to recognize that we are being drifted towards the animal, biological portion of it, right? But the goal is to cultivate that spiritual lens to feel relational, to feel loving, but not focusing on the absence of it and going to that state of fear. So I'm going to go through a little bit of, reading a couple of things that's highlighting in this chapter. So the chapter is chapter 10. And I'm on page 165, writing our story with love. Writing our story with love. So many people are, sort of carry that past, present personality and a sense of self. And most of us are married to and attached to our own past, present personality. And what Don Miguel is suggesting is, what about if we begin rewriting, because we wrote a lot of the stories based on fear, based on how we want to feel safe by being attached to something or somebody, right? Attached to an idea or whatever, right? So begin rewriting the story with the lens of love is what we're going to cultivate. Okay, So there are multiple things that stood out for me in this chapter, but I'm going to highlight a little bit, right? Okay, so page 167, line number, let's say 3. You can write a story based on love and romance, but that love has to begin with yourself. And he said, I suggest that you start a brand new relationship between you and yourself. I suggest that you start a brand new relationship between you and yourself. So what does he mean when he said between you and yourself? It means that the one that is observing, which is the I am, which is the soul that is you, and the concept of self, yourself. Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of people talk about self-love, and who is the self, right? Who is the one that is loving? Who is the one that is being loved? Is what we want to really become crystal clear. And then when we don't understand the distinction between the soul and the self, the mind and the soul, the essence and the identity, sometimes we get trapped into this pitfall that you continue to identify yourself with the mind. And sometimes, not sometimes, often, when you do that, you won't be able to release that small, subtle resistance that is nested in the mind because you're not the observant. So I guess what I want to anchor is, okay, you start a brand new relationship between you and yourself, the observant and the energy that is being observed, which is the identity, the energetics, the thoughts, the feelings, and the belief. Yeah. And then he said, treat yourself with respect. So this can be one practice. How can we see ourselves very respectfully, right? It's easy to, when there's somebody who you feel like you're respecting, it's easy to respect that person, right? Why do we respect a certain people, and why do we not respect other people? If you're not in a habit of, or a default state mode of respecting yourself, what does it mean to respect yourself? What does it mean to respect yourself? And something that he talked about, something that somebody else talked about too. I mean, I think Jay Shetty said, respect is the highest form of love. So when you respect somebody, or when you respect yourself, what is the feeling? What is the impression? What is the idea in the mind? Is what we want to cultivate, nurture, and practice, and grow that energy inside of us, right? So he said, forming a brand new relationship between you and yourself. And then you treat yourself with respect. Now, also on page 169, the second paragraph, he said, the first step towards improving your relationship with yourself is to accept yourself just the way you are. Actually, my mother often said that. Accept yourself just the way you are. You don't need to learn how to love yourself. Yeah. You don't need to learn how to love yourself. Now, why does he say that? Because love is not something that you do. It's interesting. Even like I have a singer that I so loved when I was living in Japan. They are Japanese artists, but in one of the songs that they released, he said something along the line. I listened to this music when I was probably, what's my age? Maybe like a 13 or 14, right? When I was living in Tokyo. And he said, for some reason it stood out for me. He said that love is not something that you give or receive, but it's something that's there when you notice it. Yeah. And I understand when people say, oh, I want to give love, I want to receive love, what that really means, right? But I think when we transcend into the spiritual dimension, love is all there is when you enter into that frequency. That's how I perceived it, right? So it's not like I perceived that way when I was 13, right? That'd be very wonderful if I was able to perceive what at the age of 13. But when I recall that, because it stood out for me, and then when I recall that, that's what I was feeling. Like oh, somebody's saying something different from a lot of other people, because many people say, oh, love is receive, give love, receive love, right? But he was saying, no, 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 no. Love is not, the real love is not something that you give or receive. But when you notice, it's already there. So accept yourself just the way you are. You don't need to learn how to love yourself. Because why does he say that? Because you don't need to learn anything that is who you already are. That's what he's saying. So what needs to happen is to peel off all the things that's preventing you from who you already are. Yeah, there's a huge difference in that. Trying to love yourself or practice loving yourself, right? It is about releasing, undoing things that stopping you from being who you are, which is love. Okay. And okay, page 171. The second paragraph. When you have the courage to open your heart completely to love, a miracle happens. It's interesting. Marianne Williamson, I don't know if I said this in the last call, but Marianne Williamson on the Return to Love book, she talks about, it's a interpretation of the Course in Miracle. And the definition of miracle is the shift in perception from fear to love. And if I use my language, it's about living life from the spiritual lens versus the animal human lens, because the animal human lens always going to have this egoic part of it, that fear-based attached part of it, because we want to be relating with somebody to not to lose the sense of who we are. And then when we are motivated to live life from that place, there's always going to be some fear-based energy. But the miracle happens when we rise above all that and then embody the spiritual essence of it. And that is when the miracle happens. That's what he's saying. Now, it stood out for me. I'm just going to read a couple of sentences down below. You start perceiving the reflection of your love in everything. Oh, this is so good. You start perceiving the reflection of your love in everything. So whatever that you see in the outside is simply a projection of the love that we are nurturing and cultivating, that is already inside, how much that is shining through you, right? Perceiving the reflection of your love in everything. Then eating, walking, talking, singing, dancing, showering, working, playing, everything you do becomes a ritual of love. Okay, everybody, how can we, moment to moment, from the time when we get up until go to bed, from Monday to Sunday, from the first and the end of the month, from the first to the end of the year, every single moment when we do things, how can we look at every single thing intentionally from the ritual that we're doing, a ritual of love? And guess what? The ritual of love, when everything becomes a ritual of love, you are no longer thinking, you are feeling and enjoying life. Now, why every act becomes a ritual of love? Because you're embodying who you are. You cannot experience something that you are not, right? So the experience meet who you are, who you're being in that moment, or who you're becoming in that moment, right? So the meaning of the experience reflects the person who you are becoming. So how can we begin seeing every single act that we take from the place of ritual, doing the ritual for the love? Okay, page 173, second paragraph, writing a story with love is so easy to do. Okay, this is a good sentence though. If you're thinking that there's a lot of work to do, what if you choose to believe that it's easy? Because why being who you are needs to be difficult, right? Or challenging? Or why being who you are needs to take so much time? What if you can become that now, right? Why make it complicated and difficult when love is your true nature? Okay, he's saying that stuff. By not being what you are, you resist love and you are afraid to love because you believe one of the biggest lies, and that lie is love hurts. Ah, this is good. Does anybody feel, or did anybody feel in the past that the love hurts? Love never hurts. What's hurting is based on the attachment, and attachment consists of fear, right? There's nothing in love that hurts. Why love hurts? The part of the love that we think that it hurts is the egoic attached fear that we are thinking that it's love. Yeah, I'm gonna read this again because it's so good, right? So what is it? By not being what you are, you resist love, and you are afraid to love because you believe one of the biggest lies. This is, everybody, one of the biggest lies. And that lie is love hurts. Why, for some people, love hurts? That experience, emotions and feelings that you might have felt or might be feeling inside comes from a false stories and the lie, parasite that enter into our system by eating the fruits. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Because for some of us, that might take time, right? You might feel like it's going to take time because, oh, how do I remove and eliminate that feeling? Yeah. And then if you feel like, oh, I don't even know if I can remove that feeling, because how can love not hurt when the needs are not met, right? So then if you're in that place, let's say if some of you are in that place, it means that your mind is still absorbing you. You're still identifying yourself with the mind. As I said at the beginning of this video, the mind is what we have. So that feeling and emotion that love hurts might be, in your inner body's experience and reflecting some image in your mind, but that is coming from the mind and the story, and that is not you. So if we can get that, if we can get beyond that, it's very good, because then you are embodying the soul that is who you are. Love doesn't hurt. Love gives us pleasure. So when people are in a place of love hurting, they're not in a place of love, but they're in a place of attachment and fear. Okay, I think that's all I have. I also like the sentence that everybody's divine. Okay, so a couple of practice, right, everybody? How can we recognize the attachment? Whenever we feel that, depending on what your background is, that feeling inside of us based on attachment might be a little bit different, right? And how can we begin embodying this idea that we are soul. And when we embody that we are soul, that becoming becomes much easier because you're not controlled by the past present identity. And then you can, minimize that to be able to maximize the story that you want to create based on love, just like Don Miguel Ruiz talks about. So this week practice would be to really recognizing and noticing any resistance based on attachment. You might be attached to a position, you might be attached to a role, you might be attached to a concept of who you think you are. You might be attached to the space that you're living. You might be attached to whatever the place that you go to, right? You might be attached to the people around you. So how can we relate with them from the place of soul that doesn't have any hurting, because love doesn't know how to hurt. It's the fear that enters to do that based on the lies and false stories. So I hope that makes sense. So observing and noticing the attachment is the practice for this week. See you next week.